Are you an overwhelmed SaaS founder ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where tech founders engage in an intense battle of virtual thumb wrestling, with each victory earning them a portion of their next funding round. Yeah, that may be the best use case for the metaverse that I've seen. Well, I am your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you scale from 7 figures, which is good, to 8 and 9 figures, which is outstanding. We create capital efficient growth together, premium valuation, and create freedom so that you build a business you're proud of without sacrificing your family on the altar of MRR. SaaS stock is going on this week. It's great to see some of the same faces and companies that were at Ascent conference last week. This week is also Tech Week in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, San Jose. So there's a lot going on in SaaS world. My favorite part about any of them is just being back in person with other founders, leaders, and people doing amazing things. Connection is incredibly important. And last year was kind of getting back to normal, and it seems like now we're pretty much there. I mean, granted, it's a little bit state dependent, but for the most part, it's really good to be connected with people in person again. You know, my second favorite thing about events like that is finding new solutions. Last week at Ascent, we were able to save 11% off our AWS bill, which is pretty significant. It's like going to an event and somebody saying, "Hey, would you like a free FTE?" Yes, please. So that was a really, really great thing. Last year at SaaStr, found a new company to do our security audits and save significant time and a little cash too. So many new things, better, faster, and sometimes cheaper, but I'll always take better and faster any day. It's an interesting crossroads standing at the intersection of new unknown better and the old familiar. Choosing the right solution can feel a bit like standing in front of a big vending machine with a mass array of colorful candies. So how do we make the right choice? How do we ensure that we're not just selecting the shiniest option? Because that's so easy to do. But picking the thing that really fits our business need. I mean, shiny objects are the bane of leaders. And maybe more so in SaaS because we're exposed to so many of them so fast. Getting it right, I think, is first about knowing your business inside and out. What's your vision, your goals, your capabilities? What's the right next problem to solve? You know, saving time, saving money, increasing revenue, growth, efficiency, maybe efficient growth. You know, it's a little like knowing your candy cravings before approaching the vending machine. You know, what are you really looking for? Not just looking to browse and see what's there. The next step is doing your homework and evaluating each option, comparing the true pros and cons, not just a feature list, but how would you actually use it? Diving into the real data, and most importantly, listening to your team and maybe even your clients too. Your team and clients, those two groups provide insights that are often the missing puzzle piece in the decision-making process. Keep in mind that even the best decisions involve some level of risk. I mean, that's just part of the entrepreneurial thrill ride. Be bold enough to make a choice, flexible enough to pivot if needed, and resilient enough to learn from any missteps. I mean, you'll make them. I do. We all do. Making a winning decision for your business isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about making an informed choice, embracing the journey, and savoring the sweet taste of progress. After all, in the vending machine of business, every good decision brings us one step closer to success and solving the problems that we want to solve. Our sponsor today is TechPon. Their goal is to help every business choose the right software. So when you're looking for a new solution, a great place to start is TechPon. Search by category, latest editions, most popular in a category, and best of all, honest reviews from users. You know, how does it work in the real world? Does it really match the hype? And ultimately, that's what we want to know, right? Beyond the sales pitches, the white papers, and candy-coated testimonials, you know, is this the right solution? And what do actual users say about it? And what alternatives are there out there that I don't know about yet? I mean, it's easy to engage with the usual suspects, right? What's new and exciting, better, faster, and maybe cheaper? And that's what you can learn at TechPon. You can find your next great solution at techpon.com. That's TEKPON. And also be sure to check out the TechPond SaaS podcast. Christian does a great job talking with founders and highlighting great solutions in SaaS. The best episode they've had so far is number 14. I'm just saying. They're a great group of people led by co-founders Alexandru and Alina. You can catch up with them today and tomorrow at SaaS Talk as well. Go tell them you heard about them on the SaaS Fuel podcast. And Jeff said they're awesome people. They'll love that. Well, speaking of awesome people, our founder on Tuesday was Melissa Kwan, co-founder and CEO of eWebinar, an automated webinar solutions that combines pre-recorded video with real-time interactions and live chat to deliver an engaging experience for attendees. Super sharp founder who has built a business that she runs. It doesn't run her. And she built it that way on purpose. So there's lots of lessons there. Such a great interview with Melissa. And our expert guest last week was Bobby Gillespie, brand growth consultant, author, and founder and principal of Proper Design. Solid marketing insights about differentiating your business in a crowded market. And we all want to do that. So if you missed either one of those episodes, go back and give them a listen for sure. My guest this week is Sam Baker, principal at Scale Venture Partners. Well, prior to Scale Venture Partners, Sam was a growth manager at Tilt, where he built out the company's user acquisition and retention programs before they were acquired by this company you may have heard of called Airbnb. Sam joined Scale in 2016 and focuses on opportunities in both business and infrastructure software with particular interest in the next phase of workplace productivity tools, online marketplaces, cybersecurity, and frontier technologies. His efforts contributed to the firm's investments in Locus Robotics, CyberGRX, Dusty Robotics, Socure, Soft Robotics, Perimeter X, and Proxy. I think one of the most interesting things about Scale Venture Partners is the facet of their business called a Scale Studio. So I'll let Sam tell you more about that. Welcome one of the good guys in private equity, Sam Baker. Hey, Sam, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Jeff, great to see you. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Well, tell me a little bit about your background at Box and Tilt and now Scale Venture Partners.
No, absolutely. And really appreciate you having me on today. And it's been a fun journey that's led me up here. I moved out to I'm born and raised in the greater Boston area and went to college in Rhode Island and then back up to Boston for my first job out of school, which was working for a private equity and venture capital fund of funds, which is what got me intrigued by the Valley and what was going on out here in the tech ecosystem more broadly. I'm the only person in my family that hasn't started my own company and definitely have a little bit of entrepreneurial DNA in me. And, just started seeing all of the velocity and interesting companies that were being built in the Valley in that first job, which brought me out here about a decade ago. I was an early employee at Box. I started off on the sales side, actually. It's and on a personal side, it's where my wife and I met, which changed my life in a completely different capacity, which was a ton of fun.
Extra special.
And what's that?
That's extra special.
Extra special, 100%. And, we were just growing a mile a minute at Box and, started off as an inside sales rep there. And then once we built out a more sophisticated finance function, I hopped over to the strategic planning and analysis team to help prepare the company to go public and was there for a couple of years. Bounced over to Tilt afterwards in 2014 to work with one of my closest friends, oldest brothers, in a growth capacity, helping with user acquisition and retention there. And Scale was an early investor in Box. We led the company's Series C. Back in 2009. And that's how I originally learned about the firm and interacted with one of the partners that I work with very closely here, Rory O'Driscoll. And from that point on, came full circle. And I'd always been interested in the investment ecosystem as well. And an opportunity came up as a first-year associate with Scale a couple years later. And, it was a perfect opportunity to marry what I had been doing before on the investing side, but also working for a company that wound up being one of the company's more successful investments and marrying those two worlds together. So been here for 7 years ever since and continue to grow with the firm, which has been a ton of fun.
I think that's really interesting, full circle, starting that way and then, really ending up. But moving to the dark side from East Coast to West Coast, right? How different is it in Silicon Valley versus Boston? What do you see as the differences?
There's a lot of similarities and then some differences as well. I think both cities tend to have this entrepreneurial mindset. You've got a lot of venture investing in both places. I think because of the hospital network, you tend to have a little bit more of an orientation on the early stage startup side in Boston that's more geared towards medical devices and the biotech ecosystem than you do out here. But that's rapidly changing. I guess if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, you've got a lot of some of the greatest enterprise software companies that were built in and around the Bay Area. You've got Salesforce, you've got Workday, you've got ServiceNow, et cetera. And a lot of those companies, spawned alumni that started the next generation of great SaaS companies. And it is, it's obviously been a place where the venture ecosystem was born and a lot of the capital. And so you've got those two worlds that are colliding. But you've got great academic institutions out here. You got Stanford, Berkeley, Caltech, and Boston. You've got MIT. You've got Harvard. You've got Brown, Yale, not too far away. And you've got a lot of really, really intelligent research and minds coming out of both of those places. And so there's some similarities and there's some differences as well.
It's always interesting just to have people that have been in both worlds and kind of compare and contrast. But you're right. There are a lot of similarities and just absolutely brilliant people in both of those markets.
And absolutely. And that's one of the best parts about this job, honestly, is that, I spend my time, talking to hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs every year that are going, 10, 20, 30x deeper in a space than we are. And, just learning what's getting them ticking, what kind of opportunity that they see. It's just a job where the learning curve never plateaus. And, you're always talking to people that are tinkering around with interesting things. And our job is to figure out whether or not there's a good investment opportunity there.
Right. So what are you looking at today? I mean, we've seen some changes over the last year or so in the market for sure, a little uncertainty in the future. What things are getting you excited today?
Sure. Yeah. And maybe it helps to give a little bit of context on what we're doing at Scale Venture Partners. And
yes.
Just to frame, before I dive into what's quote unquote interesting to us. I mean, just taking a huge step back. Working with Scale Venture Partners, we're a Bay Area focused early stage venture capital fund that's been around for 20 plus years, focused mostly on the first or second go-to-market round of early stage enterprise software, right, and frontier technology. So what that really amounts to is that we're doing mostly Series A's and Series B's. Once companies are finding that go-to-market inflection point and go-to-market repeatability, which we'll probably get into a little bit later today. And so, the way that we sort of divide our house here is that roughly half the team focuses on application related software and the other half of the team focuses more on the infrastructure layer. So that's developer tools, cybersecurity, and cloud infrastructure. And then there's some of us that focus a little bit in between those two worlds. I tend to focus mostly on the application side of the house. Looking for companies that are doing something, broadly horizontal, whether that's a productivity tool like Box or DocuSign, or something that's a little bit more vertical specific that's working, whether it's in the construction vertical, legal vertical, working with industrials or logistics providers, as some of our robotics deals have. And, for me, I tend to focus mostly around companies that are adding some sort of intelligence to the built world, whether that's using software, machine vision, sensors. I've had the fortunate ability to be involved in all of our robotics related investments to date. And, whether you're talking about Dusty Robotics, which is automating the layout process for commercial construction projects, or Locus Robotics, which is really changing the dynamics of how the back end of the e-commerce world works in terms of warehouse automation. That's the type of stuff that's getting me excited today. And there's so much opportunity within these markets.
Oh, without a doubt. And how do you see those markets developing over the next few years?
I think it really depends specifically on the market that you're thinking about. And, obviously I wish I had a crystal ball in front of me,
sure.
Right? But I don't. And, just taking the e-commerce and a market that Locus is attacking, for example, the growth around e-commerce over the last few years was undeniable. And, you've got this convergence of more and more people ordering their goods and services online than you ever have before.
Right.
But you have an ongoing labor shortage and infrastructure shortage in helping fulfill those orders, right? It's that, the warehouses can't keep up with the velocity of orders that they're receiving, and they can't hire fast enough to help folks, get goods in and out the door. And that's exactly what Locus is helping to fix is that they build autonomous mobile robots that work alongside the associates to just augment how much time they spend walking from goods to goods, and how much time it takes and how much effort it takes to fulfill a specific order. And that's a market that is it's really in its first inning of development, despite how large it is. I mean, there's roughly a couple million warehouse associates just in the U.S. alone. And, a chunk of them are working for Amazon. You've got folks that are working for some of the other large 3PLs like DHL, FedEx, UPS.
Right.
But that market is something that's going to continue to grow at a rate that's well outpacing, the US or global GDP for that matter.
Yeah, I think it has to expand because that's one of the biggest costs for businesses. And like you said, it's the people shortage. Labor shortage, whether it's people don't want to do that work or it's not interesting, or there's so many other opportunities.
Absolutely. And you've got a lot of confluence going on around what's happening in those labor pools, right? I mean, these are challenging jobs. Folks are, before an automation solutions comes in, you've got folks that are walking 10, 12, 14 miles a day within the warehouse to fulfill these jobs. There's a lot of other automation solutions going on inside. You've got forklifts, you've got pallets, you've got people running around pretty frantically. They can be dangerous places to work in some cases. And, they're not a high paying job at all. And so you've got folks that are willing to switch to run across the street simply because the pay is, marginally better than it was doing what they're doing. And so these warehouse operators, while the SLAs that they have from their customers are getting stronger and stronger and stiffer, it's getting harder and harder for them to retain the labor to help fulfill these orders. And so we look at a market like that and say, the only logical solution to a certain extent is to use technology to help bridge those gaps.
Right. Yeah, bridging the gap and driving cost out of the model. And it makes it even more accessible.
Right.
And because you can deliver faster.
Making the model more efficient, right?
Yeah. You're in San Francisco, not too far. So one of the things that I saw there last time I was in was in the airport, they have a barista. So it's a robot that will actually make coffee.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought, if that's where we're going, I think that is, certainly a possibility. As we're starting to see more restaurants invest in that kind of technology. What are the limitations? And I think we'll see those pushed over time.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm curious which terminal you saw that in. But no, I know that the robotics are creeping their way into a bunch of different verticals. It's not just e-commerce, it's not just construction. You're seeing more and more streamlined food services operations using robotics. Now, people have been talking about robotics for half a century at this point, and people were predicting that in 2000, we'd be driving around in flying cars, and then robots would be making us coffee or cooking us dinner. The truth of the matter is that robots are really good at handling today, anyway, very simple tasks, right? I mean, these are without a huge amount of complexity that's added to them. And I think that's one of the big differences between what we see on the ground and what you might read, in headlines and TechCrunch or, elsewhere in the media is that, you're not going to have a robot that's going to prepare you a 3-star Michelin rated.
Right.
Right. There's too much finesse. There's too much judgment. There's too much human capability that goes into preparing something complex.
It's a big mix of art and science.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And, the truth of the matter is that if you've ever interacted with, I don't want to say a vending machine, but, an automated coffee barista, you were interacting with a robot. It might not look or perceive one like one.
Right.
But if you were to open up the inside of that machine, chances are what you saw at SFO was not all that different from something that might have been there 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. Yeah, it's amazing just some of the advances in technology.
It is. Yeah, no, it's pretty remarkable. And I mean, again, that's one of the exciting parts about this job is that not only are you meeting new people all the time, that are going 20, 30, times deeper than you are in a specific subject matter, but they're also in some cases working on a technology that is, has the potential to transform the way that we work and the way that we interact and go about our day-to-day lives.
And that's fascinating to me. It's not just, what they're doing, but it's how they're thinking. It's kind of getting inside their head, how they envision the future, and they're creating that future,
right?
Making it happen.
Right. Absolutely.
So as we take some of these things to market, you talked about go-to-market inflection.
Mm-hmm.
Define that a little bit for the audience, and how do we know when we're there?
100%. And this is one of the key questions that, I get all the time. And tried to, a few years ago, I put together a blog post around what we call go-to-market repeatability. If they're, doing the first or second go-to-market round, outside of almost anything else that we're looking at, you've got to be selling into a big market. You've got to have a team that you think can go the distance. You have to have viable unit economics. But the one thing that really separates our stage from others that go a little bit early, other investors that invest a little bit earlier than we do, or a little bit later, is this notion of go-to-market repeatability. And for us, that really has a sense from an entrepreneur is that you have identified product market fit, and that you understand who your customers are, how to sell to them, and then how to retain them. I mean, that's kind of the core definition. But then there are a bunch of underlying, as you peel back the onion, there are a bunch of underlying characteristics that we can get a little bit more nuanced. But that's the key thing is that if we were to invest, if we were to lead your Series A with 10 or $15 million of new money, that you would know from a sales and marketing perspective how to use those dollars to add on to what you've been doing and build out that go-to-market operation.
And so what are the 6 signs of go-to-market repeatability? And we'll definitely link your post in the show.
Sure. if you want to do that, that's great. And these are things that, again, and these are not just the 6 signs that you need to focus on. And these were just 6 key examples that I was thinking about, and as having more and more conversation with entrepreneurs, things that were coming up more and more often. The first is figuring out who you're selling to. It's identifying your target customer and understanding the market that they participate in. It's knowing how to qualify that customer and figure out whether or not they're a good prospect for you and whether or not they have an interest and budget to buy. Understanding the pipeline diagnostics is that this is more relevant for folks at a slightly later stage. And you're not going to have this nailed coming right out of the gate, probably in doing your Series A's and B's, but something that we understand going forward. Signing healthy contracts is that there's a lot of folks that are willing to give solutions away early on, especially as they want to get a couple of key logos so that they can start generating that flywheel. Focusing on key retention and finding those expansion levers. But one thing that I didn't have in that blog post was just keeping things simple. A lot of folks over-engineer the complexity of what they're thinking about, and going through that and making it seem as though they're kind of jumping over hoops, where it's getting too far away from understanding who your customers is and whether or not they want to buy. Making sure that you have a process that's simple, it's dialed in, and it's in tune.
Really, really helpful. So what mistakes have you seen founders make, in those areas?
Yeah. And it's tough to say is that it depends from company to company. I think one of the biggest false signals that can happen within this ecosystem when you're first generating your customers is that, some of those early customer engagements don't wind up being as repeatable as you think they are. Is that these are customers that have come from, the executive's key relationships, or if they were part of, just using Y Combinator, if they were one of your batchmates, they're willing to try and buy your solution simply because they know you very well.
That happens a lot.
It does. It does frequently. And that's not a repeatable go-to-market motion, right? Is that a repeatable go-to-market motion is when the CEO or his or her co-founder can take a step back, hire somebody else on the go-to-market side into that role and have them repeat the same process that you did, or add a nuance and bring their Rolodex of customers and do the same thing. That's much more of a repeatable signal. You see a lot of folks get tripped up over selling out proof of concepts, or what we call POCs. These can be paid or unpaid engagements. A lot of folks just make the assumption that those are just automatically going to convert into annual contracts. And a lot of times they don't, is that you've got a budget for experimentation, especially at certain larger businesses where they're willing to tinker around with your solution for months, quarters, or even years, especially if there's no budget involved. And you see a lot of folks, kind of confuse those early proof of concepts with more stable, healthy, longer term engagements. But I think the biggest mistake looking back is that people thinking that they've found that repeatable motion too early, and then they go out and they build out a massive sales team, they build out a marketing team, and then they see a lot of customers churn, and or they realize that they don't have a repeatable playbook, and then suddenly you've got a bunch of headcount. You're paying, your sales and marketing motions become very inefficient. And that's a much more difficult thing to unwind.
Yeah, without a doubt. So what are the 4 vital signs of SaaS? I know one of the things you have is Scale Studio, and you talk about it in there. So that's something else we'll definitely link in the show notes, because there's so much great information there, the benchmarks and the tools. But you talk about 4 vital signs.
These are, so this is something that the broader Scale team has been working on over the last few years. And, we're a very metrics driven firm, and try to, whatever extent we can, understand, what are the backward and forward looking metrics that, really help entrepreneurs diagnose whether or not they have a healthy business. Just like a doctor or nurse is going to take vital signs with a patient when they're admitted to the ER. They might take your pulse, they might take your blood pressure, just to get a basic sense of where you are. We've done the same thing with SaaS and cloud businesses, and carried them down into what we call vital signs. The 4 of them, are your growth as a business. How quickly is your ARR growing? How quickly are you adding net new ARR? How quickly is your revenue being recognized? How efficient are you as a business? And typically, you can look at the overall efficiency of a business based upon its total spend. We tend to narrow in on sales and marketing efficiency. We've my partner again, Rory Driscoll, a number of years ago, honed in on what he called something. It was called the magic number, and this is basically how much new revenue are you generating based upon the backward-looking sales and marketing spend that you have as a business. So it's growth, efficiency, churn is the third one. Thinking about not only is what something that's important to take a look at is how quickly are you growing as a business, but the health of whether or not you're retaining them is that growth is meaningless if you can't hang on to your customers.
Right.
And the final signal is cash burn. How much money are you having to pour into the business in order to generate the growth and expansion that you are? And ultimately, at the end of the day, without cash, you can't continue. Cash is king in these worlds. So those are the 4 vital signs as we bring them down.
How do you think that things have changed over the last couple of years, where before it was growth at all cost, and now OpEx is a little bit more important, maybe a lot more important? Burn versus growth.
We're definitely seeing companies orient or more around efficiency, or I should say, healthy cash spend versus growth at all costs. And I think that this is something that you're seeing from a lot of different investors, although it's a little bit more of a nuanced answer than that, because I think it really depends on who you are as a business, how mature you are, i.e. what stage you are, and who your end customers are. Because, the broader macro climate has affected different end customers in different ways. Is that there are some customers, again, as we were going back towards logistics and e-commerce, that can continue to grow in the way that they are, or what segment you're selling into. Enterprises versus SMBs versus mid-market customers are being affected in different ways by, more expensive capital. Not only are interest rates increasing, but I think most venture investors are being more judicious about the deals that they're doing. And, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation around, the rule of 40, where it's the balance of the growth and efficiency that you have as a business. We're definitely seeing, not necessarily at the Series A and Series B, but more broadly speaking, companies that are spending more responsibly. But if you're growing very efficiently, you're participating in a big market and you are the market leader, continuing to emphasize around growth might actually be the most responsible thing for you to be doing. Because if you have 2 or 3 other competitors that are chasing you down in the market, it's only a matter of time before they run past you. And so to dial back around, making sure that you're, fine tuning efficiency to the nth degree, if you've got 3 or 4 people behind you, might not actually be the right thing.
I think that's one of the best answers I've heard. It's not a one size fits all of here's what to do because this has happened in the economy. It's not that simple. And right. I really like the way you break that down. It depends on your revenue stage. It depends on where you are in the market. It depends on who you're going after, because it's exactly right. If we look back to like the beginning of the pandemic, there are companies whose businesses stopped completely. And there are some whose businesses just exploded, off the charts growth. And so it doesn't affect everybody equally.
It doesn't. And I think just to say, to orient around efficiency, i.e. to cut your burn, it's kind of a blanket answer that may be very relevant to what you're doing, or it might be completely irrelevant. So I think folks should look very, very carefully, again, in a number of different dimensions, who you are as a business, which stage you are as a business, what does your competitive market look like, and who are your end customers and how are they being affected, right? We're seeing, last few weeks or few months have been, riddled with news about various layoffs, across the board at different tech companies, some of them, being very, very mature businesses.
Right.
If you're a founder that is selling exclusively into other SaaS businesses, you might be running into a world where budgets are being tightened, and it might be a little bit harder to close those deals than it was, 18, 24 months ago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a very good insight into the market and how you're thinking about that.
Well, thanks.
What do you think about the financial future? How has it affected your investment strategy? What are you looking at for the remainder of this year and next year?
Yeah, and again, I wish I had a crystal ball, and unfortunately, I don't. I can tell you how it's affected our business, if at all, and the differences in what we're seeing in the market. I mean, we've been in the fortunate position to have been around for a very long time as a firm. We're currently investing out of our 7th institutional fund, and have had an incredibly supportive LP base over the last 20 plus years, that have supported us in raising an 8th fund, which we closed last fall. And, we'll probably transition. We're still investing out of our 7th fund, and we'll probably transition over to our 8th fund over the course of the next few deals that we do. And are very thankful to have that financial runway to continue investing, because, it's a mix of what we're seeing out there.
Sure.
There's certain companies that we've seen where valuation expectations have come down precipitously. I mean, I think that first hit the public markets, which everybody saw. Then it hit the later stage, private investors, and then the mid-stage investors. And now we're starting to see it trickle down into our world, where, there's some Series A's and B's where the pricing and environment has adjusted considerably. But then there's other companies where the pricing expectations are very similar to where they were, 12, 18 months ago. And that's to say that, there are always great companies that are built even during uncertain times. I mean, you read the stories about Box and Airbnb and Dropbox and Uber. Yep. I mean, those businesses exactly were right. all formed, in the 2007, 2008, 2009 timeframe, where they had their early innings there, where there was just a ton of uncertainty in the market. And, we're excited about those opportunities. This is that, we feel like at this stage, we can still experience a step function reduction in risk relative to seed investors that don't get to see any revenue, and some of the later stage investors that have to take on a pretty hefty valuation risk, in the assumption that the public markets are going to stand up on the same types of multiples that they invested in. For us, I mean, we love that inflection point where you get those early signals, because things that are in motion tend to stay in motion to a certain degree. Right.
I think that's unique about what you're doing there at Score Venture Partners and maybe some of the other firms that are later stage is there's still those opportunities, and you're able to see those early on.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, I mean, there are hundreds of venture firms out there. There's no question, and there's a number of them that have been around just as long, or if not longer than we have. When you cut through a lot of the details, I mean, people ask who our greatest competitors are, and we don't tend to see the same names over and over again, because there are very few funds that are the same size that we are, that focus exclusively on the B2B/enterprise world and don't do anything else, right? A lot of our competitors are much bigger funds. They have different teams that focus on healthcare and B2B and consumer, right, and biotech and frontier. We try not to get distracted, from what we're doing. I mean, if you look across the board of our last, 7 funds, I mean, they've been very consistent, not only in terms of size, but the targets of what we're working on. It's really been that first or second go-to-market round 95% of the time, and we like where we play.
So you've done this for quite a while. What maybe the most memorable presentation in a great way, and a mistake or two that the founders have made, and it just killed the deal? And you can mention companies or not.
Yeah,
that's
I'd have to think about it. I mean, informally, each one of us sees hundreds of different quote unquote presentations a year, right? Sure. These are informal pitch decks, whether or not the company is actually raising capital or not. And then, of course, one of the final stages for us is that the entrepreneur will not just present to the deal team, but they get a chance to meet the entire partnership, and vice versa. We get to meet them. And that's more of an hour-long presentation. We were doing a lot of stuff over Zoom because we had to, but more recently they've come back in person. And there's a couple that have stuck out, and I'm not sure if it's the right call to name names, but this Founders is one of my favorite teams in our portfolio, so I can say that we did make the investment. We're very happy that we made the investment.
That's awesome.
But there was just a glaring math error in their presentation when they got to the financial slide, and the CEO caught it immediately, and he says, just very casually, I mean, and I just love the way that this rolled off. He said, "Wait, that number's wrong. And I know it's wrong. And I can't believe that I'm asking you all for $20 million when it's very clear that there's somebody here that didn't do the right math." Anyway, that's funny. No need to name the name, but that person is in the portfolio, and we're thrilled to have partnered with them.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's a really good story, because, what do you do as a leader? You look at that and you can try and gloss over it, or you just own it.
Yeah, he just totally owned it. And, it was one of these situations where everybody in the room laughed. And I think it just opened up. And this team is, again, one of our favorite teams to work with in the portfolio. And, it just showed this level of humility, as, we're all human beings. We make mistakes sometimes. Sure. Of course, their team didn't intentionally do that, but he caught it. And as opposed to trying to hide it, he was just super open about it. And he was like, "Look, we made a mistake," and made a really funny joke about it in front of all of us.
And those are the kind of people that you really want to work with.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I think, a lot of people talk about culture, and, it's easy to overlook, when there's so much financial gravitas, around the investment decision. But culture is not something that you can manufacture. It's just something that happens organically typically around the founding team, and the values that they bring to the business. And that was just one of the very clear moments where I was like, wow, what this team is clearly building, and the leaders they're building a transparent culture, and they're building something that I think that is going to be a vehicle to attract other great talent. And that's one of the things that we look for too.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Any mistakes that you've seen that just absolutely killed the deal?
I'm thinking about that one.
And you don't have to name names there.
I'm not sure that I've seen, once a presentation, we typically will save the quote unquote the final presentation for fairly late on in our diligence process, because the funding and raising process is as chaotic as it can be for entrepreneurs. Sure. And we want to be as sensitive as we possibly can be about their time. And, we don't ask somebody to come in and present unless we're taking the investment really, really seriously. And, at that point, the deal team has vetted the team, has vetted the technology, has vetted the financials and with a very, very deep level of scrutiny, such that like having a total flop or a red flag within the presentation is pretty rare. I'm struggling to come up with something where there was something within the presentation that just completely killed the deal. I mean, we have walked away from deals not necessarily because of something that was said or done in a presentation, but something that we uncovered later on as part of the diligence process, or pricing expectations that were just completely misaligned with where they thought they were being what the entrepreneur wanted. But yeah, that's a good question. I mean, probably a juicier one than I can think of right off the top.
What about some red flags? Maybe early on red flags that you see and you just go, this is not moving further.
I think every once in a blue moon, you get the sense that there's something fishy about a business, or you're tipped off about around somebody not telling you the truth, or trying to hide something in the story that they're presenting, where either something that they've told you, you've asked the same question in a couple of different ways and you get different answers, or a refusal to, our diligence requests are pretty standard and we don't ask for anything unusual. The refusal to reveal information during a diligence process is always I don't want to say it's a red flag, but it's something that gets your head going. The notion of trust is clearly the most important thing. I mean, our average holding period as a business is 7, 8, sometimes 10 years. And you're in business and or on the board of that business for close to a decade sometimes. And, that's a partnership. And, to think early on in a due diligence process that there might not be the foundations of trust in that relationship, that for me is a red flag and not something that I could ever sleep well at night, just, wondering whether or not the person might be lying to you. Again,
That's
it's
a really
like
good answer.
And it's those situations are rare, but every once in a while, a couple of times a year, and this is out of hundreds and hundreds of companies that we speak to, you catch something early on where you're like, I'm not quite sure that that's the right, the right way that I want to be going down. And especially we've got to be incredibly careful. I mean, we're investing significant sums of money on behalf of LPs that have trusted us in many cases for decades and decades. And we want to evaluate that with a really high degree of scrutiny. And, you read all the time about instances of financial fraud or otherwise at a company. And you obviously want, if there's something that's really early on that's tipping you off that there might be something that's not quite right about the business, chances are you're probably onto something.
Yeah, that's really good to know. It's an interesting hold time as well. It's not a typical, 3-5 year get in, get out.
Right.
And so that's a very different thing. I think there's a lot of value in that kind of a partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in most cases, I mean, nine cases out of 10, maybe even more, we're taking an active role in the company. We like to lead the rounds that we do. We like to take a board seat, mainly so that, we have visibility over, our investment, but also too, I mean, we find that it's the best way to work with management closely and to help bring some of the playbooks that, we've been building over the course of the firm's life. And for us, I mean, great companies take a long time to build. I mean, one of the biggest misconceptions about the Valley is that they think people get rich really quickly. In fact, it's a super slow process and a lot can go wrong along the way.
That's not how it works on TV. You just roll out of bed and build a unicorn.
It's, I think if we look over the course of the life, it's funny when I moved out, you asked about the differences between, the East and West Coast mentality. Right. And I think there was a mentality that was surprising to me when I moved out to the West Coast about how fast things move. And, on the East Coast mentality is a little bit more structured. And, again, like the lines are blurring a little bit more than they ever have. But I brought a little bit, it was just an eye-opening experience for me. And, but even great companies take a long time to be built. I mean, if I look at some of the, more successful exits that we've had in our portfolio, I mean, Box and DocuSign, I mean, Box was founded in the early 2000s, same with DocuSign. And it was over a decade in both cases before both companies went public. And it's like people don't appreciate how long it takes to build a really enduring business. But that's a lot faster than it happens in some other verticals that are much more equipment and capital intensive.
Sure. And even, those success stories, you see that on the outside and the success and the IPO, and it's taken this time, but so many things happen on the inside, so many
goodness.
close calls, so many crises that you have to lead through.
Absolutely. And the IPO is a really nice milestone in a company's history, but it's really just turning the page into a new chapter of that company's development. Right. I mean, that's when it can get really difficult. And, you've got to report your business to public stakeholders and, do so not only on a quarterly, but an annual basis. And you're being judged, not just every quarter, but every millisecond that, folks are able to trade your stock.
Right.
And the level of scrutiny and the level of preparation that I think, as I look at some of the later stage businesses that I've had the fortune of working with is that IPO prep takes years.
Yeah.
It's not just something that, a decision that's made at the management or the board level and say, oh, we're going to go public tomorrow. Like this is a very methodical process that I think a lot of people kind of in a difficult process that a lot of people underestimate.
And working with companies that you've invested in, having those board seats, what are the best ways for CEOs, founders to work with you as board members?
I always, going back to building a great relationship, right? I mean, I think good business partnerships are often like good friendships, right? Being transparent about where you are as a leader, what's going well, but also highlighting the things that are not going well. And, there's a million different answers here, but, I think the level of transparency and respect is that everybody's in this together, right? And if things work out, it works out to everybody's benefit. And if they don't work out, everybody's going down in the same ship, right? But just having regular check-ins, being honest about where we as board members can help and, the skill sets and pattern recognition and matching that we've seen over the course of the last however many decades that are relevant to the business at time. But every business is unique, right? And our leaders understand their business, 10 times better than we do as investors from the outside in some respects.
Sure.
But just having that relationship and sense of where to lean in and where not to, that transparency is just a key ingredient to great relationships and just getting a better understanding in the beginning of like, what's the best way to work with you guys? How do you like to communicate? Do you like, the weekly calls, like the daily calls, the emails back and forth? Like what is the best way to report on what's going well? What's the best way to give feedback? What's the best way to help in and to jump in, when to jump in? All of that stuff is different every time, but just setting expectations up front, I think is a key ingredient.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Just making sure everybody's on the same page. Yeah. I've had good boards, I've had bad boards, I've had no boards. And, the good ones are absolutely invaluable, but I think there are very few that really have been great for a lot of founders.
Right.
Yeah, and, more figureheads instead of relationships.
Right. And, some of my partners have served on hundreds of different boards at this point. And, I've had the fortune of working with, call it 10 or 12 at this stage. And what I can say is that everyone is a little bit different. And again, going back to your question about what to do in February 2023 as a business, and, do you balance growth? Do you balance burn? The question is similar. It's like how to manage a board. Every board's a little bit, every conversation is a little bit different. And I think it depends on a whole variety of circumstances and people rather than just having one blanket answer, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Well, where can people learn more about you and about Scale Venture Partners online?
Anyone who's interested out there, and thanks folks for tuning in, is Scale. Our website is scalevp.com. Not only about our strategy and what we do as a firm, but some of the portfolio companies that we've had the fortune of partnering with, and some of the folks on the team here as well. We're active on most social media channels. Whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter. My bio is available in both cases, and my email is sam@scalevp.com. For folks that are interested in reaching out, and I always love to have conversations, especially with folks in the audience.
Excellent. We'll make sure and link all of that in the show notes and the blog post, the 6 signs of go-to-market repeatability and the 4 vital signs of SaaS right there into the Scale website, the Scale Studio.
Cool.
And lots of good insights, benchmarks on the scalevp.com site over there under Scale Studio and the tools as well. So lots of good information.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for having me on today. It's been fun chatting with you.
Yeah, it was great talking with you, Sam. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Sam, for coming on the show and sharing your insight and industry perspective. I love what y'all are doing at Scale Venture Partners. You can learn more about Sam and Scale Venture Partners at scalevp.com. All links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. If you're enjoying the show and getting value, hit that subscribe link or follow us. And check out our new channel on YouTube with video podcast episodes, SaaS growth strategies, and shorts, which everybody is liking a lot. Everyone who subscribes this week will receive a rock from Mars. Yes, the actual red planet. It's guaranteed to be a great conversation piece, not just a paperweight. Please allow 30 to 60 years for shipping and handling. Join us next time for SaaS founder Dr. Jonathan Bakhtari, CEO of both E7 Health and U.S. Drug Test Centers. They've been called the Uber of preventive medicine for good reason. SaaS and tech are solving patient care and employer convenience challenges all across healthcare. Our expert next week is Phil Alvis, CEO and principal consultant at DevSquad. He's led the build of over 100 SaaS products for bootstrap founders and VC-funded startups alike. You won't want to miss that one. He is a wealth of knowledge, and you can find out what he's up to today. So not just building for other people, but there's quite a bit more to the story. So we'll see you next time, and as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.